not talking about the best of them. They're just talking about the rest of them. Not the worst parts, but the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello, and who told you you could eat my cookies? Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Christmas movie month, and this week we are talking the 1996 film Jingle All The Way. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by the hottest toy of the season, Andrew Williams. Are you ready for this one, Andrew?
I am, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, every dad in America wants you, Andrew.
Yeah. We're not gonna look too deeply into that, but yes. Jingle All the Way. What a classic.
I agree it's a Christmas classic. I do kind of wonder, we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, like enjoying a movie sincerely or ironically is really a difference, but we can call this a Christmas classic, right? There's enough people watching this every year.
Yeah, this is one that's actually interesting because I think there's going to be people that see we're doing it and are genuinely kind of like, "What? Why? Like, what are you talking about?" Like,
dude, friend of the show, my wife, ever since I talked about us recording it, she's like, "Why are you doing that one?" I'm like, look, the numbers are out there. Maybe not in the circles you're running in, but this isn't like a universally loved movie, but its defenders are very adamant about the quality of this film. We're going to jump into all of that. But Andrew, what's your personal history with this movie? Is it something that you watch every year? Did you watch it a lot as a kiddo and kind of fall off of it? Where do you stand here?
No, this has always been a staple in some way or another. I believe I saw this in theaters. This would have been, Thanksgiving when I was 9. So I think this definitely would have been lining up with my sensibilities at the time. But I definitely saw it in theaters. Then I actually remember, I want to say it was Thanksgiving the next year. We got it on tape. And yeah. I remember getting the tape and being like, oh man, I'm putting this on right now. So like during Thanksgiving 97, I'm guessing my house just had Jingle All the Way on repeat. As I just kept playing it again and again. But yeah, so this has always been a staple. It's always been something that I've gone back to. I probably had that period of time where I was just kind of like, yeah, it's not that great. I don't know why everybody raves about it. But no, I've always really kind of liked it once, you get past your weird film snob phase.
Right.
But always been a staple, always been a big fan. It's definitely not a Space Jam situation for me, where I still don't get what people see in Space Jam. But that's
whoa, easy. Save it for another episode. We'll get around to that. No reason to piss people off now. It's Christmas, Andrew. Yeah, I mean, pretty similar as far as my history. I probably saw it in theaters. I don't remember seeing it in theaters, but definitely watched it a lot growing up. Like Jack Frost, it's one that I would watch throughout the year. I just enjoyed the movie. And man, if I can just be an old man for a minute, you mentioned receiving this on VHS the next year. That's not a feeling that kids get anymore, I don't think, because you have streaming services, you have access to so much media. There's not like you see a movie once in theaters, you love it, and you're never going to see it again until you own it. And it's like a big deal to receive it. I have such a vivid memory of me and my brother getting a Christmas present. It was addressed to the both of us. It was Dumb and Dumber on VHS, and we rip it open together, and my brother exclaimed, "Yes, now we can watch it anytime we want." It was like the most like blockbuster commercial type dialogue coming out of his mouth. But
you can't pay for that kind of promotion.
But it's true, and it's not really like a feeling that people get anymore. And look, it's probably better these days. It's better to have access to all this stuff, but I can't help but be nostalgic about that little bit of movie happiness that is kind of lost these days.
I mean, I remember just Christmas after Christmas, especially in like the early to mid 2000s, where just so much of my Christmas presents were just movies and just DVDs upon DVDs upon DVDs, none of which I own anymore because naturally we've moved past that in the format into something higher quality. And now we're moving past that. And it's all ridiculous to think about. But just, man, that was like having movies on, like that used to be like the thing. Like I had my Blu-ray DVD collection and that was like, bam, that was like, I took pride in that. And that definitely stems from that same, I think, nostalgia being a kid and like, oh man, we finally have it on. We can watch it. Like you said, we can watch it anytime now. Yeah, you get a little wistful thinking back to the simpler times.
I had 2 giant Case Logic CD cases. This huge one with pages and pages of CDs.
The 4 disc pages.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
One was all my music, all of it. One was all of my movies. And I took them everywhere, vacation, visiting. So like I carried with them, those with me all the time. It was like my life at the time in these 2 cases, which now I just need my phone and I've got a million more options that I can cast anywhere. That's enough. Okay. That's enough being old men. Let's talk about this movie. And whenever we get to discussing the film itself, all of our favorite performances and scenes as we do, we're actually going to be joined by a guest, a returning guest. They were on our show last year at this time talking about Batman Returns for our Christmas special. They're returning again this year for our big Christmas episode. We're joined by the one and only Justin Michael, the extremely talented co-host of Nature Talks to Itself, one of the funniest podcasts out there, in my opinion. It's an improv comedy podcast that is entirely hosted by and guest starring nature, various things from nature that have the ability to talk. It is wild, bonkers, and a lot of fun. Also, the host of quite possibly my favorite podcast of all time, Batman the Animated Podcast, which is a podcast that is all about Batman the Animated Series, one of the greatest shows of all time. But beyond that, writer, voice actor, has done work on the wonderful Infinity Train animated series. Tons of credits to his name. Very honored to have him on our show. Justin Michael joining us later once again. But before we jump into that, Andrew, let's set the stage a little bit. Jingle All The Way. This movie was released November 22nd of 1996. Made on a budget of $75 million. And at the box office, it brings in $130 million. Not a smash hit, not like the highest grossing movie of the year, like some of the Christmas movies that we have talked about or will talk about. However, critically, it's not well received. It's critically panned. It holds just a 19% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, not getting good reviews from critics. And like we said earlier, you might be thinking like, well, yeah, critics, it's not a critic type movie, but audiences loved it. Fans love it. It's got a huge following. Not really. It's just a 39% on Rotten Tomatoes. That does happen sometimes, a huge split. Like the Venom movies come to mind. They're certified rotten by critics, but rated very highly by audiences. Not a case here. It's a little bit higher on the audience side, but not tremendous numbers we're looking at here as far as a critical reception.
No, definitely not. And that box office too, like, yeah, it makes back its budget, but the rule of thumb you kind of always hear is that when you factor in, marketing costs, additional things, it's usually twice the budget is when you start entering like genuine profit. So we're potentially looking at a movie that was still a loss, all things considered, because that production budget very rarely includes beyond the film itself. So we're talking, like you said, marketing, merchandise, whatever. Although ironically, we'll talk about that a bit more later. Not a lot of merchandise for this movie, which I thought was very strange. But yeah, ultimately the box office is, I guess you could say, fine at best. Definitely not any top lists of the year. Definitely not, really cementing itself as like a bona fide hit. But that critic score, 19%. That's just that seems like
it's hard to go below 20%. We talked about it all on the show. Like it is difficult.
It feels
to get
hurtful.
Below 20%.
Like it's like it genuinely like feels like it's like an insult. Like it's I feel like I've watched, and I'm sure this is something where nostalgia definitely still impacts my view of this movie. I have no doubt about that. But at the same time, still, it just feels mean. Like, it's like, wow, guys, really? 20%? It's the last movie released during Phil Hartman's lifetime, guys. Come on. Granted, we didn't know that at the time. I understand that, but still. But yeah, it's wild to think that just genuinely at the time it was it's a rare instance where like you can't even say if it was like critically derided. It was still like this massive box office success, which is definitely something. I mean, it still happens now. It's not by any means like a 1-for-1 situation now, but yeah, this is something where the box office is like I said, fine is probably the best way to put that. I would definitely think this is a movie that has made its money back over time, though. Like I there's no doubt in my mind now that this movie is super profitable now. But yeah, it's crazy to look back because like at the time being a kid, like I would have assumed that this was like a massive hit. Of like
everybody was talking about it at school.
Yeah. It's Turbo Man. How Turbo Man's not a real thing? Why is this not a real thing?
Why is that not on the shelves right now? It really is bonkers that it's not. Let's take a look at the creative team behind this movie. It is written by Randy Cornfield. Last name is Cornfield, spelled with a K, just like the band. There's probably a joke there somewhere. I just like this guy's name, Randy Cornfield. Now, not a ton of credits to his name, technically. He works directly for Fox at the time, and he's a script doctor. He's punching up some stuff, not always getting credit, and reading scripts as they come in, deciding what's going to get greenlit. Does have a story credit on the movie Eight-Legged Freaks, that like throwback B movie with David Arquette, that somehow I saw in theaters and enjoyed, but I will probably never go back and watch because my fear of spiders has only grown greater over the years. However, we can't talk about Randy Cornfield without talking about a certain lawsuit that was levied at this movie. So I'm going to put an asterisk next to Randy's name because Brian Webster, who was a high school biology teacher, sold a script called Could This Be Christmas to Murray Hill Publishing in 1993. They send the script to Fox and they never hear back. A few years later, Jingle All The Way comes out and they notice a number of similarities. From character names to plot details, they got real specific. They said there's 36 similarities. Exact lines lifted, right? In 2001, they reach a verdict, and Fox has to pay $19 million to Murray Hill Publishing. And they did make a statement that Brian Webster himself, the original writer, would be getting a portion of that. We don't know how much, but they were taking care of him. Here's the thing. Shortly after that verdict, Bob Laurel, who was the president of the publishing company at the time, passes away. They go back to court. The amount gets lowered by millions of dollars, and eventually it gets thrown out by a different judge who says, no, and they squash it. Andrew, this is a where there's smoke, there's fire situation to me. You got to imagine once one side, their leading advocate passes away, that some Fox lawyers step in, throw some money around, and get this thing taken care of. I'm not gonna like call out Randy how much was intentional, how much I don't know, but I think Brian Webster certainly deserves some credit. And one last note here, part of me kind of wants to think, well, it's the 90s. There was, like Tickle Me Elmo. Like this was a thing in pop culture, that hot item, Black Friday being sold out. However, Tickle Me Elmo doesn't hit shelves until 1996 in the summer. Jingle All The Way was already in production, so I don't think either of these scripts.
That's definitely an instance where life imitates art because, like I said, like when Jingle All The Way comes out, everyone's like, oh, they made a movie that's just Tickle Me Elmo. But the irony, Chris, today I learned about something I didn't know about before. Today I learned about the Cabbage Patch riots, which was...
enlighten me. That sounds amazing. I didn't learn about that in history class. So
I was reading about this because I was kind of curious. Because like you said, Tickle Me Elmo is the thing your brain goes to. But
I always assumed that was the inspiration for Jingle All The Way, yes.
Right, exactly. But then you realize that like Jingle All The Way is like shooting or wrapped production when Tickle Me Elmo happens. And it's probably, I guess, more akin to stuff like Power Rangers and stuff in the early 90s where there was just always a mad rush at Christmas. But the Cabbage Patch riots were a series of violent customer outbursts at several retail stores in the fall and winter of 1983. So that is
Wow.
a full decade before this. That was the year that Cabbage Patch Kids got released for sale in the United States, and there was an insane demand, and stores just did not anticipate what it was. There was like apparently outbursts at like Sears, JCPenney, Ward's, one of the precursors to Montgomery Ward, or successors to Montgomery Ward, and even Macy's. And then even like smaller stores like Kmart all had violent people trying to get these things. They would do like the lotto system you see in Jingle All The Way is something stores would do if there was too much demand. And yeah, it was just, and even some instances where apparently people brought baseball bats trying to threaten people into getting these things. And then in 1984, they finally produced more and violence declined. So that's arguably the more direct influence for what we're potentially seeing here, as far as that. But yes, today, Chris, I learned about the Cabbage Patch riots.
That name is incredible. Great band name.
Yeah.
If that's not taken by a punk band already, what are you waiting for? Get on it.
Get on it.
All right, let's take a look at our director here. The movie is directed by Brian Levant. Now, look at this guy's filmography throughout the 90s, especially Problem Child 2, Beethoven, The Flintstones, all movies I watched growing up. Some of them, Flintstones specifically, I still enjoy to this day. I think it's kind of a underrated gem from the 90s. Of course, directs Jingle All The Way. Afterwards, a few highlights, movies most people have heard of. You got Snow Dogs, which is like after Cuba Gooding Jr. won his Academy Award and did all his drama stuff. He did like that family-friendly movie. And then he also directs Are We There Yet? Ice Cube, after he did like his rated R comedies about his upbringing and that kind of lifestyle, he made the family movie, Are We There Yet? Also directs The Spy Next Door, the Jackie Chan movie that's family friendly. You get what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
That kind of movie kind of becomes his bread and butter. But the man's credits go all the way back to the 70s, initially as a TV writer on the show Happy Days. Maybe you've heard of it. So the man's long, fruitful career.
It's an interesting career. Like I said, I didn't realize he had been a writer for so long. But like you said, credits on not just Happy Days, but Jeffersons, Bad News Bears, Mork and Mindy, Married with Children, Charles in Charge. Like pretty much television credits, even directing credits, and tons of places. It's ridiculous that you didn't even think about that. And then, like you said, start in the 90s, kind of breaks through into kind of films and basically is directed off and on ever since. There's actually I think it's an episode of Gilbert Gottfried's podcast that he's on, where he actually talks pretty in depth about Jingle All The Way and some of the stuff that he was doing with that. And he mentioned that Jingle All The Way got him in director jail just because it did so badly. And then mentioned that after he did A Christmas Story 2, he went right back into director jail again. But and note here that A Christmas Story 2 is not to be confused with A Christmas Story Christmas, which is the new legacy sequel to A Christmas Story that just came out.
The Christmas Story universe is expanding.
Yeah, the Christmas Story multiverse. It's terrifying. But yeah, like kind of a journeyman director. Like I said, a lot of family friendly stuff. Even looking at his television credits, it's a lot of sitcoms, approachable stuff for families. Not really went out there, directed those two Scooby-Doo prequel movies in the late aughts. But still out there. Like you said, had a movie come out a couple years ago, still working in and out of there all the time. So good for you.
Good for you. And with that, Andrew, I think it's time we jump into this movie, our favorite performances, our favorite scenes, bring in our guest, talk about all the best parts of Jingle All The Way. You ready for this, Andrew?
We are podcasting with positivity.
Howard Langston is a typical all-American dad with a wife and son, nice house, and a job that keeps him busy. His work schedule catches up to him on Christmas Eve after realizing he forgot to pick up the toy his son wanted for Christmas that is now sold out at every store in the city. Howard makes a trip across town in search of the popular Turbo Man doll, often running into Myron, a fellow overworked father and post office worker looking for the same toy. Howard finally gets a chance to get the doll for his son at the Christmas parade downtown, when he is mistaken for the Turbo Man actor and is rushed onto the parade float in full Turbo Man uniform, complete with a working jetpack. But Myron is able to scheme his way into the parade as well, and the two have one last fight for the toy. Much like the movie itself, that synopsis just gets wackier and wackier as we go. And you know what? I think we're all the better for it.
I was going to say, this sounds like the greatest movie of all time.
What's the problem? Why is it here? Oh boy. We already talked about the critical reception of this movie. Maybe at the end we can say if we think it's a fair assessment of the film or not. But before we jump into this film and all of our favorite performances, favorite scenes, of course, Andrew, we have a guest here that we need to acknowledge.
What?
Very rude of us. Here in the studio, we are joined once again by the wonderful Justin Michael. Hey, Justin, welcome. Glad to have you back. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Yes.
This is I'm glad that we're making this a holiday tradition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've kind of, I guess it takes two to become like an annual thing, but your second appearance for the Christmas episode, yeah, tradition sounds good. Who knows what happens next year, what movie we can come up with, but this year it's all about Jingle All The Way. And in the intro of this episode, Andrew and I already talked about kind of our history with the movie, how many times we saw it growing up, and how often we rewatch it as an adult. So, Justin, I got to ask you, whenever we were talking about you coming back on the podcast for the month of December, I gave you a few films that we're thinking about covering, and you were immediately drawn to Jingle All The Way. So why is that? What's your history with this movie?
I mean, I think my history with it is I was the perfect age for it to have come out when it did. So I saw it in theaters, and I loved action figures. I feel like watching it, it's very much like Power Rangers and like Tickle Me Elmo were in the zeitgeist.
100%.
And so I was so excited to see this movie that was about parody toy hunting. So I think I have only seen it one other time other than rewatching it for the podcast. So this would be my third time. Yeah, I saw it once as a kid, once as an adult, and now once again as a super adult.
I've got to imagine
older than I'd like.
each of those were like separate experiences, because you mentioned like a parody of the toy hunting, but when you saw it as a kid, you probably didn't watch it as a parody. It was probably like, this is awesome, right? This is just
I was just like, this is great. This is about what I care about. Finding an action figure.
Finally,
this is the
a movie for me.
Top of my list. This is my job as a child, is to find the rare, whatever, like Krypton battlesuit armor Lex Luthor action figure at my local Rite Aid.
And how bonkers is it that in 1996 you couldn't go find a Turbo Man doll? Like, why weren't they on top of that? Why was this not a toy line?
I don't know. It feels naturally made for it. I feel like, and they have them now. I know that they were on like end caps and Targets or something in the last year.
The story apparently is that Arnold signed on to the film too late. Like, he apparently only signs on in like February of like the year the movie comes out. So production is super rushed. So like that original like giant Turbo Man was like only mildly produced, and there was, I think, like one other tie-in, but otherwise there was just nothing. And it seems so weird to me that like you would let not having your lead actor stand in the way of that. I know that like all these people are like, oh, we have to get the likenesses, and I'm like, action figures like this almost never look like the actors, so I don't know why they were so concerned about it. But yeah, it's because there was all these criticisms of the movie that were like, it's like a commercial for a toy. I was like, yes, but that toy doesn't exist. Like, it's literally an action figure commercial for nothing. And
it's a commercial for the Mall of America. Let's be real here.
Basically,
yes, 100%.
That's what it really is.
Because I was like, why is this in Minnesota?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was Funko that did that one that came out. I think it was just last year that did like a giant one. And they just put that out there. But yeah, it's ridiculous to me that like this is not caught on with all the nostalgia that this movie gets. But I'm not a businessman. I don't know these things.
Let's jump into this movie, into this big commercial for the Mall of America. Before we jump into all those scenes, though, of course, we're going to go through the cast, starting with our favorite casting, the best performance of the film. Every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film, and we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, I'm going to let you kick us off here. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Jingle All The Way?
I have to say, this is actually difficult for me. There's two dueling performances here that I genuinely, honestly don't know which one to go with. So I'm just going to make a snap decision and go with what my gut was originally. And I'm sure somebody else will give it to the other one. But I'm going Phil Hartman as Ted Maitland. Arnold's nosy, giant creepster of a neighbor. Just such a creep. The first time I remember watching this for the first time, and maybe it was a couple of years, and the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, Phil Hartman is such a creep in this movie, my God. But he's also like perfectly cast, and he's perfectly playing this part. He basically plays like one of the antagonists of the film, kind of. I mean, yeah, by the end of the movie, he's definitely an antagonist. But like, he really is just that annoying neighbor who just like keeps trying to move in on like every single woman in this neighborhood they live in. But he's so dedicated to it. And and I mentioned, I think during our intro, that this is the last movie released in his lifetime, but it's also the first of two movies where his job is to play the annoying neighbor, which he'd do again a couple years later in Small Soldiers. Which came out after he died. But
he's so good at it. You think like
so
smarmy, like punchable face. We love, to speak for all of us, we love Phil Hartman, but he plays that part so well.
I mean, he's just Troy McClure in real life. He really is. Like, there's just no question. But yeah, he's so good at it. He's so funny. He manages to make the part still very, very funny. He apparently read for Myron's part, and they said it wasn't right, and I agree completely. I just can't see Phil Hartman like playing that role. But and also, I'm sure we'll be talking about Sinbad in a few minutes. But it's I love Phil Hartman. Phil Hartman is great. This is probably not too far removed, or just a shade of kind of what he was doing on News Radio at the time, where on News Radio, he was just the annoying higher up at the radio station who's again carries that entire show during its entire run. But yeah, I love Phil Hartman, and when I went into this, I was like, I bet it has to be Phil Hartman. And there were definitely some surprises here that surprised me, or some performances that surprised me. But I had to stick with Phil Hartman as the neighbor. It's so perfectly cast, it's so perfectly performed, and the scenes he's in are all the better because he's in them. And he prompts the greatest line in the whole movie, so can't deny that.
Who could forget?
I mean, I can't disagree. That's 100%. Like, half the reason why me as an adult likes watching this movie is because of Phil Hartman. I think as a kid too, because you just knew him from The Simpsons. You knew him from everything, SNL too. Yeah. But damn, yeah, he's pervert Flanders. Like, that's kind of what he is.
He really is. He genuinely is. Like, if Flanders creeped on all of the neighbors' wives, that's exactly what this character is.
He's a godless Flanders. Flanders didn't have
absolutely
Christianity. He would be Ted. I agree with like everything you're saying, right down to there's kind of a battle for the Mark Strong Award, and I've got to say, I want them both to get one, but I'm not gonna change my answer to make that happen, because I'm also going with Phil Hartman for my Mark Strong Award. If you asked, 10-year-old me, it would probably be Arnold Schwarzenegger, maybe even Jake Lloyd, because I wanted to be him. But it's Phil Hartman. Like, watching the movie now as an adult, God, it's the best performance in the movie, which is the true spirit of the Mark Strong Award. I'll save my thoughts on, our lead from when we actually talk about him, but also great bonkers performance. But yeah, Phil Hartman, I mean, you said it. We hit all the high points there as far as how good he is. And you mentioned he's kind of the antagonist, but by the time he gets to like sexual assault, we can say he's a full on antagonist by the end of this movie. But I do want to highlight specifically his SNL career, because he is often referred to as like the glue of that SNL era, which is very hot in the 90s. And I know a lot of people, like SNL diehards, put him as number one as their favorite cast member ever on SNL. So not a small feat to achieve. Also, a very big RIP to Phil Hartman. Passed away very tragically. I'm sure most people know the circumstances of that. So it makes it a little bittersweet to watch his performances, but still, as tragic as that end is, you watch this movie, you're like, I want to punch that guy in the face. And that's just, again, a testament to his talents.
Yeah. I actually kind of have maybe throw a wrench in the Mark Strong Award category. I have a differing opinion.
The man who gave the Mark Strong Award to the guy that played Christopher Walken's son in Batman Returns, I am not surprised. And throw that wrench at us, baby. Who's getting your Mark Strong Award?
The wrench is... it's Phil Hartman, man. I just had to set it up with something. I will not take it away from him. You're right. He has... I can't quote the line exactly, but when he's in the car with I'm blanking on her name, but with Arnold's wife in the movie.
Liz, yeah.
Yes, with Liz. And he's like, I remember the time where we had chemistry when you asked me how to sear an ahi tuna, and I said, it's just Italian dressing. Truly just the level of
delusion almost.
Still,
my God.
Him pitting on the moves. Yeah, it's great.
Oh my God.
And how greedy is this man? The movie goes out of its way to establish every housewife in the neighborhood wants Phil's handyman work, hint, hint, wink, wink. But still, he focuses on, the largest man in his neighborhood's wife. The balls.
It's always the ones they can't have, man. That's the conquest for these jerks.
Yes.
He's got the right tool for the job for everyone. Except
is that a metaphor for this movie? Because they're after the toy that they can't obtain?
Whoa.
Oh, she is his Turbo Man? Yeah, I mean, he is objectifying her 100%.
Our minds just all got blown simultaneously. There was a collective.
He would probably call her doll, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, let's triple Mark Strong Award to Phil Hartman. I think it's a first ever for our podcast. So couldn't go to a more deserving gentleman. But look, we've got to talk about Arnold, the man, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Before we jump into this performance, I was typing up my notes. Gentlemen, I can spell his last name without looking it up. I, at some point, made it a point in my life to memorize that. How about you guys? Could you spell Schwarzenegger? I'm not quite on the spot to do it out loud right now, but...
Spell Schwarzenegger. Backwards.
Yeah. You get pulled over by a cop whose tiny mirror you've broken, and he makes you spell Arnold's name backwards to prove that you're not drunk.
That's the top level. That's how they really make sure that you're sober. But
it's like when you're spelling
I don't know.
Wednesday and you go Wednesday. I do that in my head, like Schwarzenegger. So I make sure I spell it. I don't know. I think it's from the T2 poster box, because his name is so big that the top is just Schwarzenegger in big letters across. At any rate, let's talk about his performance here as Howard Langston. I mentioned in the synopsis that he's an all-American dad, and absolutely that's the role that he is playing. Guys, Arnold Schwarzenegger is a award-winning bodybuilder from Austria. We all know this. He's got an unmistakable accent and way of talking. He stands out in a crowd. There's been plenty of times throughout his career where he is not cast as a specifically Austrian man. He's kind of playing, we kind of ignore those things about it. But most of the time, it kind of works with his action roles, or playing a robot is almost kind of like a sly nod at his speech pattern. But here, I just can't get over the fact that no one acknowledges it. And look, diversity is important. It's okay that not every lead of your movie is, like an American with Midwest accent. But it is bonkers to me that he is cast in this role. It's never, there's a throwaway line from Phil Hartman, you can't bench press. You can't bench press your way out of this one. It's almost the only time that his size is acknowledged, or his accent is never acknowledged. Nobody else in his family has it. I want to know this man's story. What I'm getting at here is a big part of this appeal, a big part of the movie's appeal is that Arnold is in it. But imagine for a second if he wasn't the biggest movie star on the face of the planet in the 90s. Imagine if this was like the first time you ever heard of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Imagine if like they were casting this movie and they cast Arnold Schwarzenegger, unheard of. You would watch this and be like, I have so many questions. Why is this happening? This is so weird, right? Wouldn't it just be weird?
Yeah, why is he getting into so many scuffles? Why is he crashing into every pile of things?
Yeah.
Like the movie is almost self-reflexively more aware that Arnold's in it than like any of the characters are.
That's the best way to put it. Like the movie goes to these lengths to be like, let's make sure Arnold has some action sequences, but like nobody in the movie like acknowledges it really. I also just have to say, it's wild to me that the whole reason that Arnold is apparently such an aloof father is because he sells mattresses so hard. Like that's
Who could forget the mattress boom of the 90s though? I mean, they were like
that seems like this dude's late at work on December 23rd at like I'm guessing well into the evening because he's selling mattresses. And it's like, bruh. That's the most ridiculous part of the whole movie. It loses me completely. No.
the most unrealistic part.
He's
such a big mattress bigwig that he has like a personal secretary who it's that movie trope where like the secretary knows more about their family schedule than they do, and they're always rushing in like you got to make karate class or whatever. And normally that's like the guy's working on Wall Street or whatever, but he's a mattress salesman in Minnesota. That's his big job.
Yeah, it's wild. Like you said, it's this. His whole character, there's just so many questions, but the movie just plows forward.
Yeah, I mean, nobody, even at the end when it's like, it feels like a Superman Clark Kent thing where it's like, we can't recognize the only man with the most distinct accent in the movie.
Yes.
In terms of like, your child and your wife are both like, wait a minute. Who is this Turbo Man? Like you're standing, 6 inches away from him, and he's talking in your father's voice.
And it's like a yellow tinted visor. It's not like blocking half of his face. It's not like Batman with a cowl. Like you can still see his whole face. It's just a little yellow.
And it's not like Arnold's got some Val Kilmer lips, so this is not like a distinguishable lower mouth of his face, but lower mouth of his face, not a distinguishable mouth on his face. But yeah, it's like. He's literally has his son in his arms and is flying with him, and his son still doesn't know it's him.
Would you agree, though? We're going to jump into this kind of, are we enjoying the movie sincerely or ironically is a big question in this movie. But would you agree that adds to the appeal of the movie, whether it was intended or not? Like, I think it's a big reason that has I guess you can call it a cult following. It's a reason people rewatch this movie, though, is like it is ridiculous, but it's so shamelessly ridiculous that it's fun.
I think so. I think that's definitely part of it. And like, I gotta say, like, I actually kind of enjoy that, like, Arnold is just here. I don't know if I can necessarily, again, say that the movie was making, like, deliberate choices or whatever, but I kind of like that Arnold is just a guy in this movie. And that, like, his accent's just his accent. And, like, yeah, he's a jacked dude, but, like, it's not part of the plot of this movie. Like, sure, it raises questions, but it's also, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say, like, refreshing, because there's so many movies that Arnold's in where they have to make some, like, crack about his accent. And you're like, I get it. Dude's from Austria. Like, I know. Like, but at the same time, like, the cartoonish nature of it at times, like, I definitely feel like you're making it over the top on purpose, but I think that is definitely part of its appeal, where people go back to it just because, the third act is really just Arnold is a superhero. I mean, what's wrong with that?
Definitely in the 90s, as part of his career where he was transitioning out of solely doing big action movies, getting more into like family movies and comedies, starting with Kindergarten Cop to start off the decade in 1990. But even that, it's playing against type, but he's still a cop at the end of the day. So it's still like acknowledging he looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger. But then he's got movies like Junior, which I haven't rewatched. I'm sure it's aged wonderfully. But again, playing against type. And of course, this one here, Jingle All The Way, kind of making that transition away from the traditional action movie star. And it worked. These movies still made plenty of money at the box office. And, speaking of being big in the 90s, Sinbad is in this movie, like we mentioned. He plays Myron, the I call him a post office worker because he mentioned working. He says the term post office, but it's clearly not USPS. They clearly would not have signed off on it. It's got like a different logo, but he's supposed to be, USPS.
It's like
post
U.S.
office
Mail
worker.
or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
There's no question here. And I won't lie. This was the competition for the Mark Strong Award for me.
Oh,
Sinbad
it wasn't Arnold. It
Myron
was
Larrabee.
Myron.
It was
Okay.
not Arnold. It was Sinbad. Every scene. So one of the things I was reading about this is that Sinbad apparently improv'd a lot of his dialogue. And so Arnold's reactions to what he's saying are also like genuine because Arnold didn't know what he was going to be saying. And just some of the rants he goes on in character, I was just like, this is fantastic. Like, I don't know where he's pulling this from. I don't know what deep part of his brain he's going to find these. But just consistently, I was like, this dude's really funny. Like, I thought it was perfect for what this movie was doing. And I don't know if you go as far as like Sinbad's the one above all else who understood the assignment, but like he really leans into it with almost every scene that he's in. He looks like he's having a blast. And so, yeah, I got no shame in saying that Sinbad was my competition for the Mark Strong Award because I think he is just having a ball with it, and just the stuff from the fights and the scuffles they have to the whole scene at the radio station where he just keeps threatening people with bombs that he doesn't know if they're bombs or not. He's just trying to save himself. Like, all of it's just hilarious and working for me. I can't deny it whatsoever. I love everything Sinbad is doing here. I just know that obviously this was the 90s. Sinbad was like everywhere for a while there. Don't really remember why that happened, but I will no hesitation in saying that this movie is better because Sinbad is in it. No regrets.
100%. 100%. I feel like when he shows up on screen, the movie kind of picks up. Like, it is a weirdly slow beginning to a movie.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, but when does Sinbad show up? Because, like, the promise is Arnold versus Sinbad. And luckily, I think Phil Hartman is kind of there just to fill in until Sinbad shows up as antagonist. And, like, be the at-home villain. And I'm, like, thankful that we got Phil Hartman. But I'm like, come on, where's Sinbad? It almost feels weird when Sinbad's not in the movie. Like, I remembered him being a bigger part of the movie than he is.
Yeah.
But, like, I feel like there's patches without him where I'm like, yeah, but, like, it's kind of fun just to watch them fight each other and yell at each other and
this
even
movie
sit
could
in a
use
coffee
more
shop
Sinbad.
together.
But
Yeah, they just keep meeting up like out of happenstance. But like in my mind, it's like, oh, they meet up in the beginning and the rest of the adventures together, but they keep getting separated and popping back in. Sinbad, yeah, in the 90s, at least for me, he was a big deal because a couple other movies he did around this time, House Guest and First Kid, I don't know if they were on TV all the time or what, but I watched those movies a lot. And I really enjoyed them. I don't think either one was like huge box office, blockbusters. But Sinbad was like the guy for me. Granted, as a young one, I probably wasn't watching a stand up. That probably wasn't made for me. But like his movies, his like family comedies, I was all about him.
Yeah, he was everywhere. I actually unironically love his performance in an odd little football comedy called Necessary Roughness, where he plays a vegetarian physics TA who rejoins the football team. I
had to Google real quick just because one of my notes says like, wow, Sinbad is a big dude. Because when he's next to Arnold, he doesn't look small. He holds his own like when they fight and stuff. So I Googled real quick, how tall is Sinbad? Google says 6'4".
That means he's taller than Arnold.
Yeah, Arnold's barely 6 feet at the time. He's probably maybe even under by now as he shrinks. But what's hilarious about this is Google's telling me he's 6'4", and right below that it says people also searched for Phil Hartman, 5'11", Robert Conrad, 5'8". Robert Conrad plays the cop in this movie.
The cop, yeah.
And people are searching for him right now in December. Everybody's watching Jingle All The Way and wondering the same thing I was, I guess. Like, how big are these people next to Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yeah, check out their wiki feet. Let's really make those comparisons next.
According to Wikipedia, Sinbad is 6'6".
Wiki feet's that's the Patreon content for our podcast coming soon.
Yeah. Apparently Sinbad being as big as Arnold was a reason why they went with him. Like apparently they'd looked at like Joe Pesci. The director apparently really wanted Joe Pesci for Myron. Daniel Stern even got kind of picked, but they apparently didn't go with Daniel Stern because they thought it would be too similar to Home Alone, but they wanted Joe Pesci somehow. But so Sinbad was picked partly because he wouldn't be like dwarfed next to Arnold. And you'll notice that Sinbad spends the whole movie like really bundled up. Like they're really trying to add some size.
They're bulking him up.
Yeah, they're like, let's get some more layers here. You got room for another base layer in there? Let's make you look as big as possible. But yeah, that's always funny to me to remember that Arnold is like barely 6 feet tall, and so it's really not hard for someone to be taller than Arnold. But they really are trying hard to also make him look imposing so that Arnold doesn't look like he'd just steamroll him, which is the important stuff to be figuring out in your wholesome family Christmas comedy.
Naturally.
Yeah, there's a lot of like upshots at Arnold. Like there's a lot of like kind of canted angles that feel like kind of like old classic like Western movie tricks where it's like, you know, you hear all those Western actors.
The old Tom Cruise.
Yeah, exactly.
Rounding out the family in this movie, we have Rita Wilson playing Liz Langston, Howard's wife, and the mom of the movie. Plenty of credits to her name, including movies like That Thing You Do, which is like Andrew's like favorite movie. Very talented woman, has plenty of credits and performances in theater, and is even a producer on several high-profile films. And look, hashtag positivity podcast and everything. She gets the short end of the stick. She's not given much to do, and it's kind of a bummer every time I rewatch it. She's got a big moment where she finally like realizes what Ted's up to and slams the eggnog in his face. It's awesome, but other than that, she's playing a pretty bare bones mom role, which I think she's capable of much more, but the screenwriting kind of lets her down in that regard.
Yeah, she's pretty much wife, mom, woman. You know, like there's not much to it.
There really isn't. Like I said, her smacking Ted is very cathartic. It's definitely a moment in the movie where I was like, yes. You know, outside the other 80 minutes where I'm also saying that, but but otherwise, like you said, there's just not a lot to go with there. Just not a lot of depth to that character. Apparently makes a mean sugar cookie. That's the context clues of the film seem to clue us into that, but yeah, I won't deny that moment is really, really good, but and the movie does build to it. But yeah, she basically, because the way I kind of look at it is that you've got Arnold and Sinbad are essentially the A plot of this movie, whereas her and Ted are essentially the B plot. And she basically just spends her entire plot of this movie just like trying to get away from creepster Phil Hartman. Like that's literally her role in that plot. And finally decks him in the face and everybody cheered.
Jake Lloyd plays Jamie, the son in the movie, the one that wants the Turbo Man action figure. And Jake Lloyd, the very next year, would be in this little movie called Star Wars Episode 1, playing Anakin Skywalker. So two very high-profile roles for Jake Lloyd that kind of define his career. Real quick, before we talk about his performance, pretty tragic story as far as child actors go, and has since, now as an adult, been diagnosed with schizophrenia and has plenty of public legal troubles, we can say. So kind of heart goes out to him, being a child actor and receiving the wrath of Star Wars fandom, and again, all stuff very well documented. Dude has been through a lot, has his troubles, not making excuses for it, just looking at it and saying, man, that's kind of sad. But you know what? In 1996, he was doing a great job playing a cute little kid that is really into Power Rangers or Turbo Man and wants his toy.
Yeah, he was excellent in this.
Yeah, he plays this exactly as he needs to. I've said this statement before, and I hope it's not too inflammatory, but my friend said to me once, nobody hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans. And I don't know if I've ever heard a truer statement in my entire life. It's like, wait, you hear about the stuff with the sequel trilogy, but I'm like, I was there for the prequel trilogy. I remember how the burgeoning internet and Star Wars fandom treated Jake Lloyd, and it was horrible. Like, this is not even getting into what they did to Ahmed Best. Like, this is like it was really bad. And he even said, I think, that his retirement from acting in 2001 was like bullying, not just of his peers at like school, but like in the press. Like, there were articles in the press that were still making fun of this kid. And it's just like, my God, like, he's literally a child. Like, you're like, my God, guys. So yeah, like I said, that's not to give an excuse for anything, but there's a lot of troubles here, and like you said, the heart goes out to him. But here, yeah, he's doing great in this movie. He does exactly what he needs to do. I think his reactions and his disappointment when Arnold is letting him down are genuine. Like, I think he comes through as pretty authentic in a lot of that stuff. And when even he's trying to like when he's talking to his mom and he's trying to explain how he yelled at his dad, and he's taking, he's putting the fault on himself, even though it's still absolutely not his fault. Like, I'm like, all of this comes through perfectly fine. Like, I don't feel like he's out of depth with anything. And in cases, like I said, a lot of it feels very genuine. So I think Jake Lloyd is doing a great job here.
Yeah, I feel like maybe he's my runner-up for the award.
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking about it, but it's like, it's one of those performances. It's like, yeah, he's hitting all the notes of what you want the kid in this kind of movie to be, which is cute, but also like he feels authentic. You know what got me was like the minute when he turns and it's like, the beginning of the movie and Arnold's like, is there anything that I can do for you to make it up? Like whatever. It's like, anything. What can I get you? And then the snap turn to like reciting exactly what the commercial presentation of what Turbo Man is like spot on, like good delivery, first of all, as an actor, a little kid actor. And also I was like, yeah, that's how I thought of things. That is how I begged for things when I wanted a toy. So I was like, yeah, this feels authentic, and like he delivered it well. He's a child. It's still hard to do any of that as a child.
Yeah, you definitely, you can relate to like, this toy is the most important thing in my life right now. And it as a kid, you're like, yeah, I get that. Like, I have to have the one hot toy, or the Power Rangers toy, like says kind of the equivalent. And I was going to shout out that same part, like where he gives the whole spiel about the Turbo Man doll and what all it can do. And then the cherry on top is at the very end. He does like even like the fine print of the commercial that's like, something required, battery's not included, blah, blah. As he's like giving the pitch to his dad, it's like, yeah, that's absolutely something like, I would do or think was funny when I was a kid, trying to talk about how hyped I am about the toy. My favorite line of his in the movie, probably second to at the end when he finally gets the Turbo Man doll and he says, "Now this is Turbo Man." That was a Star Wars joke. I don't know. We'll see if that works.
Chris, I just talked about bullying.
I'm celebrating his performance. It's not bullying.
Yeah, I wanted Sebulba to show up, on one of those parade floats. A little too early, I guess.
Yeah, a few years before that.
Well, there's a few other bit parts that we can definitely shout out as we go through the scenes of this movie. But let's do just that. Let's jump into the scenes of this movie, specifically the best scenes and our personal favorites of the film. So, Andrew, I'm going to have you kick this off. When is this movie firing on all cylinders, and what is your favorite scene in Jingle All The Way?
This is, I'm reminded of that Reddit post that I sent you. That was like, what scene stops a 9 out of 10 movie from being a 10 out of 10? And somebody said Jingle All The Way, and they specifically pointed out the final scene is what stops it from being a 10 out of 10. And I was like, yeah, without that scene, Jingle All The Way is a real 10 out of 10. But that final scene is good. But this is another one where I'm actually struggling. But one of the scenes that's burned into my brain, and so I'm actually going to go with that, though, is it is the kind of scene that leads up to the radio station sequence. Because anytime I'm running anywhere, I start reciting the reindeer names in my head. Because I'm just doing what Arnold does in this movie. Like when I used to go to like the boxing gym and we do laps to start the class, I'm sitting there just saying the reindeer names in my head again and again and again, just being like, I'm having a great time, even though I was definitely lying to myself about having a great time. But so lead that, and then leading up to just this radio station sequence, because it's where we've got Sinbad kind of doing ridiculous Sinbad things. We've got Arnold still just trying to be father, and we actually have one of my minor but favorite characters in this movie showing up. We have Colonel Mustard himself, Martin Mull, appearing as our KQRS DJ, or Mr. Ponytail Man, I guess, as he might be credited in the actual credits. But I'm just finding this whole scene really, like, every next piece I just think is really funny. It's not just from their run down the street into the radio station, Arnold's weird harassment of the DJ to the point that he calls the cops and thinks the dude's trying to break in, to Myron's first attempt at doing, I shouldn't find, I guess, postal bomb jokes that funny. It's not a funny situation, folks.
It's definitely not a joke that we made today. It's probably like pre 9/11, like
Same with people getting trampled. Getting toys. Like, I feel like there's so much of this stuff that's like, isn't this funny? And then it's like, oh no. This is bad. No. This is bad. No, we can't do this anymore.
I think while I agree, you still wouldn't put those jokes in the movie today. It still works in the movie for me because it's just so over the top every chance that it gets. From like the guy that announces like the lotto because they have like the last Turbo Man doll in the store. He's giving his speech like on a speak and spell microphone. Like every chance they get to go like above and beyond with how ridiculous this is, I think it helps some of the more questionable violent stuff feel a little more Looney Tunes than terrorism it actually is.
Yeah.
Hugely.
So he does and I guess the benefit to Sinbad's character is he doesn't actually think any of these are actually bombs. He's just doing it as a diversion, basically. And this is unfortunately, he finds out later that this is a sick world we're living in with sick people. But and then obviously they eventually run out and they run into the cops again. And we also get you mentioned Robert Conrad earlier as Officer Alexander Hummel. I don't know if that's ever actually said at any point or if that's just on his person. Yeah. But one of his many interactions with Arnold. This Robert Conrad must never go off duty because he is apparently on duty at all times when Arnold is doing anything.
Always on
in
the
any
scene.
part of the city. Fun fact:
he can survive an explosion.
Like he can survive everything. Fun fact though: Robert Conrad was the original James West on the Wild Wild West television show, a role later inhabited by Will Smith. So this is the sequence I'm going with. Just because the buildup is something that is just seared into my brain. Obviously, Martin Mull, I think, is funny anywhere he shows up. Even though this is literally just the one scene he's in this movie. You hear him on the radio a little bit throughout the film. But you've got Arnold and Sinbad's desperation kind of at full force. You've got Sinbad still doing his ridiculous like rants where he's like, "You're one of those people that puts the trash can in front of the mailbox, so I have to get out of the truck." And he's like, "No, I recycle." And Sinbad's just even more incensed. Like he's just mad at everything, being a mailman, and it all comes through. It works for me. So this is what I'm dialing in as my favorite scene of the film.
Love it.
Yeah, it's a great pick. It's pretty fun. And I gotta say, you mentioned you recite the reindeer names because of the scene. As a child, at some point, I made it a point to memorize how to spell Schwarzenegger. I never memorized all the names of the reindeer. I'm not confident that if I was trying to win that, I could name every reindeer. Andrew, you sound like you're pretty confident. Justin, do you know the names of all the reindeer?
I mean, I'll try it right now. Rudolph, Donner, Blitzen, Comet, Cupid. Oh, if only I was running with presents against Sinbad. No.
If you want to start running, I will show up and start throwing mail at you.
Yeah, please do.
And then it just comes to you. I get it. Yeah. Yeah, on a long enough time.
Moment.
Give me infinite time. Eventually, I'll remember. I think Vixen. I'm not sure if you named Cupid. Like I think eventually I'll
Vixen,
get there.
Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen.
Yep.
Ridiculous, crazy. Remembering the important things there, Andrew. Justin, how about
for me?
you?
I feel like. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was about to move.
I was just gonna say my kind of similar moment to like what you were saying about always, keeping that like reindeer memorization in your brain is whenever I go through an airport and I'm rushing, I imagine that I'm in Home Alone. And like running like the family.
I need
is,
batteries
like,
for my
crazy.
talk boy.
I say, are you the dad, the long brown trench coat, or are you Kevin McAllister, like trying to catch up to somebody?
I mean, weirdly, I feel like I'm like Catherine O'Hara. That's who I want to be.
Either
in
way,
that
the
movie.
music in your head is the dun 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 dun.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, very good.
If you're running in an airport, that's what you need. You need
Absolutely.
Christmas music. But
Justin, how about you? What is your favorite scene in Jingle All the Way?
it similarly is very tough. I'd say, let me give you my little runner-up because I love the opening to this movie. I love a lived-in parody from clearly the director of this film, like, authentically loves toys. I believe the director actually does have a book that came out this year about his toy collection. So, like, he is somebody who loves, like, action figures and has collected stuff for a while. And I only just discovered that, like, a week ago. So I was like, this is perfect timing to share that fact. And I think he has a picture of, like, the original Turbo Man prop on his Instagram. But it's so clear that, like, to make a loving recreation of, like, toy commercials, toy packaging, Power Rangers kind of stuff. I mean, I got to like do like the smallest version of that. I got to make like some like Batman the Animated Series action figure commercials back in 2015, and I was like, yes, let me do this forever. and you don't get paid a lot of money for that. I will say that. You just do it for the love of the thing. But so I think seeing this fake Power Rangers and how well it was shot was great because I think to parody something well, you have to love it. You can't hate it. It can't be like a mean thing. I think you can always tell. But for me, I think it's that Mall of America bouncy ball scene. I think that's like the best action set piece with comedy in there that holds up. Because I think starting from like the announcement, the overly complicated, like, okay, we're going to give everybody a bouncy ball and whoever gets it. And then they're just like, they rush him. And then it almost feels like Temple of Doom. I don't know if you remember like the beginning where the vial of poison or the antidote is being kicked around and Harrison Ford's trying to get it.
Very,
it feels
very
like
similar.
This movie's version of that where just a yellow ball, it looks like a practical effect. It's just like they had to bounce this ball and Arnold is running after it. Him versus that small child. Everybody becomes unnecessarily antagonistic in this movie. Like no matter who is
much so.
Like truly, I loved him crawling through small spaces, ending up in the ball pit and being like beaten up by a horde of angry moms, with everything they had on them.
Pervert
bags.
Which
yes.
prompts
I'm not a
another
pervert. I think he yells, I'm not a pervert.
Yes.
He does. I'm not a pervert. I'm just looking for a Turbo Man doll.
Yes, I think that is one of the best, like, unintentional laughs. Like, I'm not sure that was supposed to be as funny as it is.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's, like, after the scene. It's transitioning to the next scene with Jim Belushi. And he's just walking away, and he has that throwaway line, I'm not the pervert. It's like, Arnold
so
screaming
insane.
that in a mall is comedy gold. It's
It's
hilarious.
so ridiculous.
It's great. I'm sorry, sir. You're looking for a Turbo Man doll, so you can't possibly be a pervert. You're right.
Absolutely.
My mistake.
Yes.
I do want to shout out John Rothman, who plays the Speak and Spell announcement guy, just because he's just being so smug and so condescending. He's playing
Really
that part
good.
of like the greedy toy store manager who knows he's got these people on the hook and they're going to basically do whatever he wants. I also love this scene because Arnold is chasing after one ball that he doesn't know is actually won anything. Like, there's no
you're
right.
guarantee
It's just a chance.
that this
Yeah.
ball, there's other balls that he could have gotten. Like, there's no reason to chase this one through the whole mall. But he does anyway because that's how dedicated a father he is. But it's just this, there's just so much of Arnold, and just Arnold taking like stunt falls like this entire chase sequence. Like he's ramming his face. He's Arnold like scurrying through children's playgrounds. Just it's so over the top. And again, it just feels like it's one of those things that understands exactly what this movie is and what it's doing.
That scene of him jumping after the ball, sliding into the glass like railing of the walkway, I felt like the smartest kid, because even from watching this movie as a kid, like I knew there was some camera trickery going on there. So what clearly happened is they started the shot with him pressed up against the glass. They drag him away, and then they play it in reverse to make it look like he slides against the glass. And I thought I was like, studying film as a 10-year-old. I was like, I know how they did that trick. It made me feel, big brain as a little kid.
Man, way smarter than me. I definitely didn't notice that.
Well, now that it's been pointed out, next time you watch this movie as a super adult, you will. Oh yeah, that's the scene Chris was talking about.
Yeah, we call that elderly.
I prefer super. Like whenever I'm old enough, I'm going to be at a super adult home.
But if everyone's elderly, then nobody's elderly.
Great call out, great pick for best scene. Clearly, the Mall of America was such a big tie-in here. The premiere of this movie was at the Mall of America. It showed there before it released wide, so it was definitely like a big tie-in. So definitely a big tentpole scene of the movie. But look, guys, for my favorite scene, I'm just gonna go with it. I'm gonna go with the finale of this movie, the parade scene, where clearly half of the budget went for all the special effects.
Half.
At least
try 2/3.
They got like Superman 4 level flying effects for this final scene, and it's so bonkers, so as over the top as the movie is, the end still feels more over the top. But if you've stuck around the movie this long, hopefully you're still having a good time with the fact that this parade suit has a working jetpack that literally flies him all around the city. It's just so bonkers. But the reason I'm going with this, not just for the fun over-the-top stuff, which I do enjoy, but there is a moment in this finale that should not work with how over-the-top and silly and misguided at times the movie is. And look, hashtag PP, but like, Howard doesn't even really have an arc on this movie. He doesn't really learn a lesson. He kind of gets rewarded for still being a bad dad, and everything just works out.
Yeah, he's not a good dad in the end. It doesn't absolve him of being absentee.
There's no moral here. So that's why I'm always shocked that this scene gets me. It's whenever he gets to be Turbo Man, and he gets to give the toy to a kid in the crowd, and he says, Jamie, and then it zooms in on him, and he goes, he knows my name. I love that scene. It works so well. I'm like, man, that kid is so happy right now. He just made his son's day. And it really, like, Christmas magic makes me feel good inside. Yeah. It lands for me. It shouldn't land. He didn't learn a lesson. Nothing's really coming together here, but I like it. It's still just a really nice moment between a father and a son, and him like making his dreams come true. And that's like a new core memory for this child that he will never forget the rest of his life. And it works. I don't know why or how. It maybe doesn't land for everybody, but it lands for me. So for that reason alone, against all odds, they land that finale moment in this movie, and it works. Favorite scene in the movie.
It's great. I also love the stock footage. Not stock footage, but clearly they're shooting a real parade. So like the beginning of it, you actually get to see the beginning of whatever a real Christmas parade is from the year it came out. And, you have like your Sesame Street stuff. And I spotted the tick. And I was so excited. Yes. I was like, yes, somebody has the tick from A Christmas Parade when the tick was very popular, or at least the cartoon was. It
had to be such a specific window, because that's like a 2 or 3 season show, I think.
Like what, 94 to 96 or something?
So this was like the last. This was the last year you would have done it, basically.
Yeah. That's kind of what's satisfying about the movie to me, is like all the toys they crash into are real toys. I was like, okay, so those are those old Fantastic Four figures. We got some Spawn. We got I was like truly like catching stuff that I remember seeing on shelves. So, ooh, what a treat.
Even something like, dude, Jamie's room is so cool. Like, I wanted that room as a kid. He's got this giant, like, painted on the wall, a giant Captain America, like comic book Captain America. And he's got, like, Hulk, I think, and, like, Marvel sheets. And I love it so much because it's pre-superhero movies, at least the big boom. It's pre-MCU. Like, if you saw that now, it'd all be, like, obviously it's already licensed characters, but it'd be, like, actors' likenesses and stuff. Like, it wouldn't be like just like a pure, because if you loved comic books in '96, you were like a real one. You know what I mean? Like, it was still niche, it was still nerdy, unlike it is now. So something about seeing a kid like so into that stuff and having this cool comic book stuff when it was still like a a thing for kids or a thing for nerds. Like, it's just not a look that you see anymore. I love that room. I don't know the story behind him getting a giant Captain America on his wall, but it's very
they
cool.
actually hired Jack Kirby personally to do that now.
I was gonna say,
wish.
he had me for a second there.
No, it also looks nothing like how Jack Kirby draws. But
But there is a Kirby crackle hidden somewhere in the film.
is. You can find it, folks. No, I do love that. You're right. That room was so cool. Like the Captain America mural on the wall. I was just like, this is rad. I would want this room as a kid. I mean, I was 9 when this movie came out, so like every single piece of this was like hitting for me. Like I have stories of my dad buying me like a Dragon Zord in like May for Christmas because he saw it on the shelf and was like, "Oh, lock that down." So shout out to you, Dad, for putting in the work when it came to Christmas. Multiple stories of my dad like trolling toy stores like in the summer. Like my dad had like a sixth sense apparently for what you wouldn't be able to find in the winter. So I'm just saying my dad is better than Howard Langston. He's far more plugged in and knew when something was. He knew when like he's like, that's the last one, and I bet there's not going to be more of them, and he would do that multiple times. But yeah, that room is so cool. But that finale, my brother did give me some notes of his own for this movie because he loves it. And he also pointed out that the finale is his favorite moment. Not for the moment that you like it, though. He loves the scene where Dementor / Sinbad is chasing after Jamie, and he says, "Out of my way, box," and he shoves over that gift box that just like, collapses comically on the ground.
And the ornaments all come to check in on it.
Yeah.
I think it honestly is like one of the funniest little throwaway moments. Yes, your brother is 100% correct.
So good.
The way Sinbad says it, "Out of my way, box," and just smashes it, just perfect.
And
so good.
Speaking of Sinbad as the villain, like almost more unrealistic than Turbo Man having a working jetpack is the villain launches his fist and it retrieves, and then he does like the nana nana boo boo sign. Like it's clearly his hand in the glove. That just we just saw magic.
We just fully buy in.
Guys, we have accomplished so many scientific breakthroughs at this point.
For this parade float.
Yeah, and even knowing where this movie goes, like I had to like pause and be like, wait, this feels crazier. And this is a movie where, you know, a reindeer has chased Arnold through a home. We've had that Mall of America chase scene. We've had like Kung Fu Santas, you know, like there's so many crazy things that do lead up to it, but somehow it still feels like it's like Jump the Shark.
Yes.
It's also where it needs to go.
Meanwhile, the cop parade float just has a cop on a trampoline. That's like the best that they can do for some reason.
Yeah, they're celebrating all of them surviving, not exploding.
So speaking of like jokes and themes that wouldn't fly today, much like the bombs in the post office, how about the cop character in general? Because Mike, there's a lot of layers to this. So shout out Robert Conrad, R.I.P. passed away a couple of years ago, playing our cop here. There's a couple things going on here. One, we're supposed to like think the cop is a bad guy, but all he does is his job throughout the entire movie. He pulls him over when he's speeding. He like Arnold's always in the wrong when they butt heads, but he slapstickily always gets blown up or coffee spilled on him. And we're supposed to be like, haha, you got what you deserved, but he doesn't really, unless you're just of the mind that, you know, cops do deserve it. And speaking of that mindset, there's this line that would not be delivered today or wouldn't have the same context where he pulls Arnold over in the beginning of the movie and he says, "Oh, I'm late to my kid's karate practice." And the cop's line is, "Oh, the last thing that I want right now is for a private citizen to be disappointed in my duty." Sarcastically. But that should be a concern of yours, police officer. So maybe the movie's aware of that. Maybe that is why we're supposed to not be on his side, is that he doesn't care what the citizens think of him.
You know, it's the rule of Jingle All the Way. No matter what, the minute you are facing off with Arnold, you have to be antagonistic.
100%.
No matter what you were thinking beforehand, you're suddenly also a villain.
I do like Robert Conrad as the cop a lot. Also, the way he goes, just the way he says, "You broke my little mirror." Like, just
Yeah, Broke My Little Mirror is
delivery,
like maybe
just-
contender for line of the movie.
Yeah, that's actually the other thing that like anytime I watch this movie, I just remember how much of it is just seared into my brain. Like there is so much of this movie that I just remember. It's just in my head. And I gotta say, possibly one of the most memorable Jim Belushi performances ever. That I certainly remember.
Real quick here, I'm gonna. To my knowledge, Jim Belushi doesn't have any like highly publicized problematic things about him. If he does, I'm gonna take all this back. But I'm gonna go to bat for Jim Belushi. I think he is a totally fine comedic actor. The only people always bring up he's the unfunny brother or the other Belushi. Totally unfair. He's a totally different style. He's not emulating his brother by any means. I think those comparisons are like in bad faith. Jim Belushi is totally fine. And even great at times. Like you look at this performance here, it's almost like a precursor to like Bad Santa, like the comedy of a mall Santa being like really like a low level criminal. I mean, that's like wholly lifted to make the Bad Santa movie. And I think it's funny telling him like to respect Santa Claus, but his beard falls off. What he's doing here totally works. You can count me as a
absolutely.
Jim Belushi fan.
I also a huge fan of what he does in Twin Peaks: The Return. Possibly he's like genuinely him and his brother are two of my favorite characters in that entire run of that show. They are unironically extremely funny and they work very well in the context of that. But yeah, here again, like, and it's honestly like if you're not even paying attention, you might not even know if it's him. Like if you're not really kind of paying attention because it moves by so fast and he's kind of there and then he's gone. But again, so much of the stuff he's doing, just like when Arnold calls them out as being con men, he's like offended. Like he's like personally insulted that Arnold has questioned the legitimacy of their operation.
Yeah.
And
I mean, he
it's
does
all
have the
fun.
best mall Santa display I've ever seen in the mall. Like it is meticulous. The color, the big neon Santa lights.
Beautiful.
I think some of the most beautiful art direction in the movie.
But it was built with blood money, as we learned.
Yes. We did.
Or did the
learn
mall
it was
pay
built
for
with
that?
blood
We don't
money.
know. We don't know who built this.
That's true. I shouldn't come down on him so bad.
Yeah, he didn't haul it in.
Before we get out of here, I gotta highlight this one moment from Ted where the facade kind of drops. Because the entire movie, he's kind of putting on this nice guy act, and we know it, even if the characters at times don't. And it's whenever he is baking cookies, and he's on the phone with Arnold, and they're so good, really playing up how good they are and stuff. And then when he gets off the phone, like you see in the background, this entire scene, the kids have been like playing in the living room. And then he goes to pick up a cookie, and it's hot, and he burns himself, and he goes, ah! And then just for no reason, he turns to the kids and says, pipe down in there! Even though they didn't do anything, but he's just so angry that he's got to yell at somebody, so he turns and yells at the kids. I think the one moment you see like his true side, and it's again another shout out to Phil Hartman, just hilarious.
I do, yeah. I also love that his nickname for Howard is Howitzer, which I just think is ridiculous. He calls him that at one point. The last thing I want to shout out to is that sequence that you mentioned, Justin, the intro, kind of the Turbo Man show / movie they're watching. Harvey Korman plays the president in that sequence for some reason, and Lorraine Newman plays the first lady. But I was reading through the credits and I saw Harvey Korman and I was like, wait.
And who is
Teddy
Harvey
Lamar?
Korman? I mean, I know, but in case we have listeners that don't.
If you are a fan of Mel Brooks films and have seen the film Blazing Saddles, you may be familiar with Hedley Lamar, which is what I mostly associate him with. But he's had passed away in 2008, a decades-long career, probably most notably known for the older generation for the Carol Burnett Show, but appeared in a bunch of Mel Brooks movies, but I remember him most from Blazing Saddles. But yeah, he's in the movie on screen, 30 seconds. Like, I genuinely was like, didn't even recognize it was him, because you're kind of watching it, like most of that sequence is you watching it on like a television screen, which is a little strange for decision, but I also love that it's filmed at that iconic, like, mountain face that I don't remember what it's called, but you saw it in Star Trek.
Bronson's
Bill and
Cave,
Ted 2. Yeah, like that very iconic thing. They use that too. So there's like, and which again,
Bronson
you're kind
Cave?
of pointing.
I'm pretty. I mean, I don't think we see the cave in the shot,
You see
but
the
if it's
peak.
that is the one that's been in, is like the entrance to the Bat Cave in the '66 show. Like I said, it's the
Guys,
Star
that's
Trek.
walking
It's a-
distance from me. I can go if that's where it is.
Are you serious, dude? There's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff was shot there. The
Yeah,
most
I knew
recent
it was
one,
the '66 Batman location, but man,
Apparently,
Palm
apparently the
Springs,
rock
the,
formation is the Vasquez Rocks. I don't the mountain itself. is
Oh,
apparently
okay.
called that. But either way,
might be
it's been in
conflating
so
some
much
locations.
stuff.
But if you're close to
might
Bronson's
be.
Cave, you got to go like take some shots there. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Palm
Close,
Springs
but-
is the most
I see.
recent use of the cave that I'm aware of. The time loop movie. That's where they get caught in the time loop.
Yeah.
At Bronson's Cave.
interesting.
But either way, just love that intro sequence. Like you said, you love a world that's lived in. I also love that during this movie, the Turbo Man movie is out. So I don't know what this thing is that we're watching. If it's a television special versus the movie that's in theaters, I don't know.
I guess there's
I
the
don't wanna
Power
think too
Rangers
hard.
movie was out at the Power Rangers
At the same
TV
time as the show,
you
it
know.
works. But yeah, just again, Harvey Korman and Lorraine Newman. Lorraine Newman being one of the original SNL cast members. Again, just randomly showing up here as the first lady for 30 seconds. But
Yeah, you got
fun
Chris
stuff.
Parnell too, right? Early
Yeah.
Chris Parnell.
You got Curtis Armstrong randomly here as Booster, the chain smoking Booster. I just remember him from Revenge of the Nerds. But
Now
Yeah.
he has a line that I'm not even repeating on this podcast.
No,
It's-
definitely
absolutely
like
not.
the worst line of the movie.
yeah. Hashtag PP,
Yo.
but yikes. Ooh.
Yeah, I guess my shout out is maybe the hyper specific shout out. Well, I'd say to the art direction and production design in general. I think
Yeah.
it's like so detail oriented. Like they didn't need, like the packaging of the toys. Everything feels very lived in. This is so weird. But I'm gonna give a shout out to the sloshy brain juice inside of
Yes.
the brain in a jar helmet. Because every
Beautiful.
time when you see it in the beginning and when Sinbad's wearing it, I'm like, that made it harder, and it looks better. It's funny when it's moving around.
Yeah.
And it
Sloshing
looks
around.
gross and cool. Yeah, it's
They didn't
so-
have to go that hard for like such a random detail,
But they did.
but it stands out so much.
Yeah, it adds something. So I loved that.
And it feels very 90s. It feels like a toy, like a simple gimmick in a 90s toy. Like it totally fits.
That's the toy I want. I want that toy now. I would
With
buy
launching
it if it
fist.
existed. Yeah, truly. If they released it today.
Well, Justin, I gotta say, well, first off, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays,
Thank you.
Happy New Year's, all that good stuff that we celebrate this time of year. And thank you for once again being a guest on Best of the Rest. We'll see what we can drag you back for next year. But thank you so much for joining us for Jingle All the Way. And before we get out of here, why don't you let the people know where else they can go to hear your wonderful voice?
Oh, my wonderful voice. Thank you guys so much for having me, first of all. This is truly a treat. So it was really fun to rewatch, really fun to talk with you guys. Right now, coming up soon, is season 3 of a podcast that I make with Jace Armstrong called Nature Talks to Itself. It's the first podcast by nature for anybody. I play a geode named Tony. My co-host is a tiny crunchy leaf named a tiny crunchy leaf, and we have different pieces of nature on to talk about. Basically, it's an improv comedy podcast in character. So we have Nicole Byer and Tim Simons, who you might know from like Veep or I don't know, plenty of other things. Lots of fun comedians on the show. Betsy Sidaro. So check it out. Listen, it's free. Spotify, iTunes, on Instagram, Twitter at Nature Talks Pod. Batman the Animated Podcast still exists if you want to listen to that.
Shout out to both of those podcasts. I mean, Batman the Animated Podcast is how I was introduced to your work, and it's one of my favorite podcasts of all time. But Nature Talks to Itself, what I love about that, like I love a good podcast pitch and a good podcast title, and the title is the pitch. I've shared that with so many people. Nature talks to itself. It's nature talking to itself. Like that's all you need to know right there, and it's exactly what it sounds like. And the end result is absolutely hilarious. Big fan of the podcast. So yeah, if you're listening to this, you hear our voices right now. Subscribe to those podcasts. Check them out. And
Yeah, we
R.I.P.
actually have a
Kevin
live
Conroy.
show coming. Yes, R.I.P. Love him. Like such a what a weird, sad end of year. yeah,
I didn't mean to make the end of the episode a bummer, but tell us about this live podcast you have coming up.
No, it's okay. The live show is if you live in San Francisco, we're doing it at San Francisco Sketch Fest, and it's on Saturday, I believe, January 21st. And so we have James Adomian, Jessica McKenna, and Nicole Sakura. So come on out. It'll be one of our first live shows. Hoping to do more, but also new episodes of the pod on January 5th. So there you go.
Very
cool.
Fun. Check them out. And Justin, we'll talk to you in a year.
Yes. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good holiday.
We are podcasting with positivity.
Andrew, I mean, we have one more week, one more episode left of our Christmas movie month, but the season is winding down to a close. We are almost about out of it. You know, you wait all year for it, and it's exciting, and it just comes and goes so fast, doesn't it?
It does. Even the day we're recording this, we're already like a third of the way into the month. So like, it just comes and it stacks and it stacks and it goes. And before you know it, it's over, and your deep feelings of sadness and your existential crisis come back, and it sucks.
Well, enjoy the high and the spirit while you can, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great holiday season, having a great Christmas, and anything else you may celebrate, and end it all with a great and happy new year. But before we get to that new year, before we get to 2023, it's time for our question of the week. This week, our question comes from Mike Lynch, who actually had a question inspired by an episode we had earlier this month. Here's what Mike says. Jumping off from your idea of Harry and Marv starring in a serious movie between Home Alone films, offhand comment I made about them making a movie about their prison escape during a riot, because that sounds hilarious. He says, which film would you like to expand into a universe where different characters star in films rated G, PG, PG-13, R, and unrated? Boy, unrated films. I don't know. That's quite the gamut. But I like this idea here. So taking a movie, expanding it to a universe where it's not always the same tone, not always the same rating, kind of all over the place. I think that's an interesting take. But Andrew, what's a movie that has the potential for a universe with a wide array of films? What do you think?
This one, Jingle All The Way.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Because we've got Turbo Man, and if Turbo Man goes through the life cycle of any superhero, he's going to start off with fairly approachable PG-13 movies, stuff you can take the whole family to. But as that fan base ages, they're going to find themselves complacent with the continual mass appeal of Turbo Man, and they're probably going to find themselves wanting that dare I say dark and gritty Turbo Man that really dives into the weird, complicated history of where does his anthropomorphic human-based tiger come from? What's the origin there? What is the dark body horror that we can dive into on the origin of Booster here, folks? But on the flip side of that, Booster is clearly an approachable character for kids, so I'm sure there's a G-rated Booster television special somewhere out there. Maybe he teams up with Big Bird. They're both giant animals. I was saying fur covered, but Big Bird's feathers. And feathers aren't fur, folks. That's weird. But sure, give me the Turbo Man extended. There's probably other superheroes in that Turbo Man universe. There almost assuredly is. Give me the Justice League, and then give me the Snyder cut of that Justice League with Turbo Man. I'm into it. Sure. If you're gonna do something, do it here. And then you can do like a weird crime mafia story where you find out that Howard's actually just a front for laundering money because nobody buys that many mattresses, Howard.
It comes like pre-stuffed with money. You don't got to add the money yourself. We put laundered money into your mattress. There's a lot of places you can go with it. And yeah, in the Jingle All The Way universe, you've got like the crime legal drama with Myron and the guy that he beats up to take his suit. Like, what's the story there? And
These are all ridiculous, folks. These are all absolutely ridiculous. But I think genuinely it's funny.
The Unrated is the further exploits of Ted and the Housewives. That's the name of the movie, Ted and the Housewives. It's in the back of the video rental store. That is both a hilarious answer, but also one I can kind of see working. And honestly, if this movie was a huge hit, there would have at least been an animated series, right? So many movies in the 90s had animated series, you know, Godzilla, or even like Dumb and Dumber and The Mask. Earthworm Jim had an animated series. Like, this was definitely ripe for that kind of spinoff. So,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I could see that.
I was trying to think of, is there an instance where like an in-universe thing got its own genuine spinoff? And like Lightyear, I guess, is the only thing like I can think of where like we took an in-universe like toy or something and spun out into like the film of the thing that was supposed to be the thing that made it so popular. Because I feel like there's got to be more examples of that, especially in the era of, but even stuff like Transformers is technically still just, it's an ad in as much, but like that's all, you know, it's still, you're watching the Transformers. You're not watching a show of something in a Transformers movie. Like it's a very odd, specific genre.
Yeah, there's got to be more examples than Lightyear, but nothing's coming to mind. Yeah, that's interesting. Started off as like a media within the media, and then gets its own thing spun out from under. I'm gonna be thinking on that one. But as far as Mike Lynch's question here, first off, I think I've said on the podcast before, like the idea of an extended universe. Like I love the MCU. I think it's great. I enjoy most of the content they put out. I don't want every studio and every franchise trying to copy that model, because it's not the universe that makes it great. It's the individual movie's quality that is good, and it's just kind of like there's different ways to do it, you know. And I feel like a lot of times it's been the cart before the horse. They try to make this big, you know. Dark Universe is a great example, but the individual movies aren't kind of standing up for it. But you know what I would like to see? I think. Well, go with me on this walk here. I think a franchise that is doing an excellent job at this, and has been doing an excellent job for nearly 3 decades now, is Law and Order on television. In fact, Richard Belzer, who plays Detective Munch, has the Guinness Book of World Records for playing the same character on the most number of different TV shows. Because there was a Homicide, Life on the Street, I think first. That even predates Law and Order. And then he played the character on Law and Order in every single spinoff since then, which is pretty cool. But what I like about the way that they do that universe is, like, if you watch, like, SVU is the main one I follow, and you can just watch SVU, and you've got all the content you need for their ongoing story. But if you switch and watch the, you know, regular Law and Order, or Organized Crime is one of the ones they have out there right now, you still get like a standalone story, but like a DA that comes into the story will be someone you know from the other series. And if you know, great. It just makes it feel like it's all in the same world, but you don't need the knowledge of the other show to enjoy it. And I like that idea. Right. So I would like to see, you know, like a string of novels, like legal thrillers were big in the 90s. So if you bring those back, like a string of legal thrillers, and maybe you have like a detective at the center and a series of movies following that detective, but you could also have like a lawyer specific movie spin-off, and that lawyer pops up in the detective story, or vice versa, and on. Maybe a key jury member, or of course the police officers, beat style police officers could have their own movie, and they have this kind of the cast where they bleed in and out. And yeah, I realize that's just a ripoff of Law and Order, but I think there could be a movie version of that as well, whether it is Law and Order films or just a completely different thing kind of playing in the same sandbox. But I like that kind of interconnectivity where it's like minor characters crossing over, almost cameos, and if you know it's great and it makes it better, but it doesn't require you to jump around and watch everything from that universe.
Right,
don't know how this pitch gets to rated G, and I don't know how it gets to unrated, but definitely a PG-13 and R sandbox at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely a universe that, like you said, it's already been doing it for a long time. So there's plenty of places to expand there. And, I'm sure some eagle-eyed listener, Andrew?
Eagle-eared, Andrew.
Eagle-eared.
They got the ears of an eagle. They can hear well,
ears
right?
of an eagle.
What can hear
sure,
really well?
Whatever.
We gotta come up with a new metaphor here. Bats, bat-eared listener.
I'm joking. But there's plenty of places to go with that. Like you said, there's already tons of stuff that's arguably already happened, but I think it definitely opens itself up. It's really like there's tons of options with almost anything. Like you could take a lot of different things and really kind of merge them into, obviously superheroes feel like it's just easy. Like it's just an easy thing to be like, oh, you could do this with superheroes. And it's like, oh, well, maybe we could do a little bit better than that. But I'm sticking with my Jingle All The Way answer. Give me the Turbo Man movie, you cowards. I guarantee you, this is another instance where, like, if it were successful, would there have been a Turbo Man movie? Because, like, you think about Lightyear, and Lightyear, first off, Toy Story is a massive success on its own. There's already just Toy Story made tons of money, was a super huge success, and they had all the Toy Story sequels. But the appeal of Toy Story is the relationship between like the toys, like the focus on them and their relationship with each other. Making a movie without them is it's kind of a very different path to follow, which is what Lightyear is. Don't get me wrong, I liked Lightyear, but it's definitely its own completely different thing. With Jingle All The Way, I mean, Turbo Man is the point. Like, I think making a Turbo Man movie coming out of this is a fairly logical extension versus just trying to do Jingle All The Way too, as logical as it is when you're talking, big budget holiday family films. But I think segueing into a Turbo Man movie here is a much cleaner line than like a Lightyear movie coming out of Toy Story would have been, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, Jingle All The Way is better than Toy Story. I hear you loud and clear, Andrew. Isn't it weird?
I'm glad I'm being clearly understood.
Isn't it weird that this movie is called Jingle All The Way? It's got no relation to. It feels like they were shooting a Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and they wanted to give it a code name to throw people off. So it's like this. It's a holiday movie. It's called Jingle All The Way, and they just forgot to change the code name. They forgot to call the movie Turbo Man or something.
It feels like that. It feels like that Disney movie that just came out, Strange World. It's like, just put Strange World in there as a placeholder. We'll come back to it a year later. I know.
We've already made the posters.
Yeah, it's Strange World. That seems kind of simple. All right, I guess. Oh no, but it's so strange. There is a sequel in name only as well, starring Larry.
Andrew, we almost made it all the way through the podcast without mentioning that fact, and you just had to bring it up. No, it's staying.
Get it out. Fine. One thing I do want to point out is we didn't mention this during the body of the episode, but the music in this movie by David Newman, like he goes hard on some of those Turbo Man themes. Like he really like there's a lot of like Christmas music in here. This movie is where my father was introduced to the Brian Setzer Orchestra and all their continuous Christmas albums. But the Turbo Man music especially, I'm like, David Newman went way harder on that than he had to, especially like when he shows up at the parade and they've got like the rock version with like the electric guitars. As a kid, I was like, this is so dope. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And that was another soundtrack that was not released for a very long time, was sitting on the shelf there with my desire for the original TMNT soundtrack and the Clue soundtrack, because those three movies, Chris, bona fide classics.
David Newman. Here's Andrew. I have a fun David Newman story. Believe it or not, you ready for this?
Sure.
A good friend of mine in high school, middle school, and high school. I knew him for a while. In high school, for sure. I was one day watching Daddy Daycare, as you do, and in the opening credits, it says music by David Newman. And my good friend's name was David Newman. And I saw him at school. I was like, dude, you won't believe this. I was watching this movie. I was watching Daddy Daycare. And the music was by a guy named David Newman. And he's like, yeah, he does a ton of music. Like he does a ton of movies. This is obviously nothing new to my friend David Newman, who probably heard this comment a million times. Because David Newman, he's kind of a big deal. He's been doing scores for a number of decades. I'm looking at his wiki real quick. Since the 80s, it looks like. So by the time we were in the early 2000s, he has like dozens of movies to his name. So my friend David Newman, I already knew about David Newman. And David Newman, my friend, if you're haven't talked to you in years, but if you somehow found our podcast and you're listening to this, shout out to my David Newman story. David Newman, the composer, if you're listening to this, come be a guest on our show.
Please do. It's like when people make Andy Williams jokes to me, which you immediately classify yourself as being from a completely different generation if you do that, because nobody my age or younger knows who Andy Williams is.
I just Googled it because I don't know what you're talking about. Born in 1927. Okay.
He's already dead, right?
Yeah, in 2012.
Yeah. My grandmother outlived you, dude. Sucks for you. But born before you and still alive. But no. If you ever hear the rather iconic version of It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year, that very kind of classic Christmas version is probably notably sung by Andy Williams. And then Moon River is this other big thing. But like I'll have people like in college, it happened a lot. I would have professors that would get to Andrew Williams and they'd be like, "Oh, Moon River," and I would be like, "Such an old reference. Like it's so old of a reference. Why are you doing this to me? Be better. You can come up with some new material." Like The Butcher from The Butcher and the Blade. His name? Andy Williams. I'm
really curious now. Two things. I want to know what you want expanded into a universe of movies. What concept do you think would work for that? And also, there's got to be another example of media being spun out into its own standalone thing that we're not thinking of, but if something came to mind for you, let us know, and you can do so by hopping into our Discord. There's a link in our show notes. Go and join us, and let us know. I'm dying to hear it. You can send us an email, besttheRestPod@gmail.com. Hit us up on social media, whatever's most convenient for you. And one last big thank you to Justin Michael for once again being our Christmas holiday guest for our Christmas week episode. Such a pleasure to have him on the show, and check out those podcasts that we're talking about. Batman, the animated podcast, as well as the ongoing Nature Talks to Itself. Once again, I'm putting some links in the show notes. Show them some love. Check it out. Very good content. And until next time, until the last week of the year, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch for the music. You can check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes once again for a SoundCloud link. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. But the man's credits go all the way back to the 70s, initially as a TV writer on the show Happy Days. Maybe you've heard of it. So the man's long, fruitful
It all comes
career,
back to Ron Howard.
Oh, wait, we haven't done that yet.
You'll see what I mean next week, folks. You can cut that. You can cut that.